we'll come back together, and I've been asked to share another poem. I'll share one that's really short, really quick, and it's about my good friend right here, Dr. Tom. When you see this old cowboy, just remember, he's not ragged by his choice. He never meant to bow his leg or put that gravel in his voice. He's just chasing what he really loves and what's burning in his soul, wishing to God that he had been born about 100 years ago. That's my good friend Tom. Oh, goodness. Hope everybody had a good lunch. I know I did. Really good. Boy, they got the best hamburgers down here in the corner you ever ate. That's really big. All right. We're going to pick up back where we was at. We were talking about working group reports and some of the recommendations we were going to make. And so, where's Stephen at? Okay.
He likes to make it.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman. You hear me?
All right. We've got a lot of stuff to cover because we only got 30 minutes to come up with these and get them written, but we'll do more formal work towards the end. One of the things I would like to bring up, if you'll look in...
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Yes, Lord.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Could I ask a favor? Could you have Dorothea text me the live link? I would appreciate it.
Dorothea, text you the live link.
Yes, please.
That is a done deal. You can take that to the bank.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Okay, good. And speaking of Dorothea, I need to give her a big round of congratulations and thank yous because she's one of the major inputs in having this meeting as we've had. We also need to thank our sound people over here. I've been with them. This will be the 5th year that they've been around where I have, and they have done such an outstanding job, board. So if you get a chance to pat them on the back before the end of the day, I would greatly appreciate it because they do a really good job. They do an awful lot. I'm hunting. I wish I knew where stuff was in this book. Stephen, do you have something you want to bring up, a recommendation or anything? Right now. Shazam!
Yes.
Okay.
After. Sorry, that was kind of.
You wasn't expecting it, was you?
No. Let me get to where I've got it written down.
Okay. I don't know where they're at. I thought I had them right here. Somebody got my book while I was gone. It says tab 6. Ah, there they are. Okay. All right.
What's tab?
Tab 6. Is that not them?
I'm talking about the 4.
Oh, the 4. Oh. Oh, that's yeah, tab 8.
Those the ones with
Yes. Okay. Stephen, it's in tab 8.
Yes.
Tab 8, and what we're talking about and what we want to do is what we really want to do is come up with a recommendation to the Bureau of Land Management on which of these options the board endorses. I guess, would that be a good way of putting that? And so I thought we'd have a discussion about each of them,
Okay.
and then come up. Okay? That makes sense, Ben?
I'm just looking at the schedule, and it says that the recommendations is for the 4:30 time slot. So are we
Right.
moving that to now?
Well, what we're doing, we're not making recommendations, we are working on them. Since we can't do what we do in 30 minutes, you know, in our other board meetings, we have about a 2-hour where we talk about this and write them down and all that. We can't do a 2-hour deal within 30 minutes. Since we had a short working group meeting, we talked about them, and then we're going to go ahead and discuss. We're not going to formalize them. We're just going to get our minds around them, and then at the 4:30, after we have public comments, we will then formulate them. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Okay. Stephen, you got an opinion of which one of these you think we need to do, so I'll just turn it over to you.
Well, after reviewing over lunch and also the past several days and reviewing the different options that are available, considering the time frame that we have and constraints that we have to work with in order to prevent more ecological damage from happening on the range, and also considering the budget that the BLM has to work within and the confines of that, I personally believe that option number 1 is the best option to go with, both in terms of sustainability on the range and ensuring that the least amount of ecological damage is done, and also the least amount of money in order to be fiscally sound is spent for the horses. And so my recommendation is that the board of the 4 options given by the BLM accept option number 1 and advise that the BLM support option number 1 in their different options that they've given to Congress.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Any other board member have? Okay. Celeste?
I've been over these options a lot, and the information that's in front of us on these pages is pretty scant. For the purposes of the board, really reading through and understanding what each option entails. And I would say that none of these options are good as they stand for various reasons, but that there are some pieces of them, but that in one of our recommendations that we haven't yet started talking about yet incorporates some pieces of those options already. So I would actually not be supportive of any of these options, because I think what we are going to present takes little pieces from each of them.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. You said I know for a fact that BLM just didn't pull these options out of the air. Correct. They worked with a group. They had a working group that sat down, and these were as well thought out as they could based on everything. And I know some of the things that are in all 4 of these options is difficult. It is difficult, but part of the reason why they have an advisory board is to help them in these difficult decisions. Now, no matter what recommendation we make, BLM has the right to say, no, we don't like that. Okay, but the fact that they put these 3 options or these 4 options out reflects that they would like to have some input on these options, and I really appreciate what you're saying. And if I had my way, I could take part of 1, part of 2, part of 3, and part of 4 and come up with something. But that's not the options that we have, and I hate being kind of forced into making a decision like this, but you got to have a little bit of trust that these were the 4 options that they come up with based on the information that I don't have, that you don't have, and like that.
But well, Alan Shepard did say yesterday that these were options, that there was some mixing and matching possible in them, and perhaps, I don't think he's here, but perhaps Bruce can, am I not assuming correctly?
Well, I can't speak for that, but I just want to remind the board that this report was for Congress and not the BLM, not to select a option on the report to Congress. We were wanting Congress to provide us some direction on how they felt.
Well, let me ask you then, Bruce, would it be advantageous or beneficial if the board did, or would it just be kind of a trying to push a truck uphill? I mean,
well, yeah, that's, I mean, because I think we heard yesterday, I think it was asked to myself and Alan, when do we expect to hear back from Congress? And I think the answer was, we have no idea.
no idea. And
Yeah.
and
And so, I mean, and getting your question is that I think that, no, I don't think it would be pushing uphill, a truck uphill, but to make a recommendation on which option or which blend of options. I mean, you either can take them as they're written in the report to Congress, or you can mix and match or incorporate a new things as well.
Okay.
I mean, so.
well, and I'm just thinking out loud. Would a recommendation? Well, we don't make a recommendation to Congress, so I don't guess that would work. I'm going to say that they take action on this as fast as they can due to the situation that we've got. But yeah, that ain't going to work either. So.
And just, kind of following is that, basically we take our direction from Congress.
Right.
I mean, if Congress said,
And you can't
will
lobby.
implement
Right.
option one, we are then,
Well, see,
we'll be doing that.
Well,
I
see,
would.
well, I was
I
going to
could
say,
intercede.
that's the benefit of us, since we don't work for BLM, we can lobby Congress. We can ask for answers, but where y'all can't. You had to do a response to them, so okay. Stephen?
And I would also add that by us saying we are in favor of this option and voting on it as a board, if I were personally a congressman and there was a board that was chartered with making recommendations to the BLM, I would want to know where that board stood as far as the recommendations that had been given to me by BLM, so that I could know going forward what they thought in their collective knowledge was the best option.
Could I construe that as a campaign speech? You're going to run for Congress? Is that?
Hey, Mr.
Not
Chairman,
anytime soon.
Yes. Who is?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a question that would help me, if you don't mind. You don't just deliver a report to Congress. I mean, did you just put this in the Federal Register and let it go? I mean, who received it? What committee? What staff? What on the Senate, the House? Who was delivered? Who was it delivered to? Who was it discussed with, Bruce?
Alan, you want to answer that question? You did the briefings.
They are passing the buck to Alan, and he'll be up here in just a minute.
I hate to do it, man, but that's your baby.
I believe when we finalized the complete packet and it went through the different layers of approval through our organization, it went to Congress through our budget staff, I believe. And would it have been OMB too, Kristen?
Well, part of it is we don't know everyone who has been discussed because,
Right.
the secretary's office is involved. They don't let folks at our level
Yeah.
know who's talked to whom. And so we've provided some information because we wanted you to know that we had prepared this report and kind of the different things that could be emphasized or de-emphasized and the investments that were taken. And I mean, we don't know yet what will come of it. So the board can say, you know, looking at the different things that were emphasized, knowing that there's large investments involved in it. You know, there's one area where we double adoptions. There's another where we use permanent sterilization a lot more. That's emphasized. Others where gathers are, you know, huge, that type of thing, or off-range holding becomes, you know, very, very large. And also the overall assumption of trying to get around a 10-year period. I mean, that's even something that, you know, I've heard folks interested in a different time frame.
Right.
So as far as what helps the board, I don't know that understanding who's seen it or what, because we don't really know what the next step is. I think the opportunity today is to provide feedback on you know, those different options, and then we can always work with you, you know, to get better ideas of what that costs and all that stuff, and you know how we come up with those numbers. So that's my recommendation.
Okay.
Well, my question, though, I mean, if it went to Secretary Zinke's office, I mean, I understand it goes up the chain, but I kind of need to know if it was presented to the Appropriations Committee in the House, if it was presented to Murkowski's staff, was it submitted to the Western Caucus? I mean, who saw this? Who? Because if we're going to make recommendations,
Barry,
I need to kind of predicate that. So,
Barry,
yes.
we don't have that answer for you, and there's no way, nobody in this room knows that.
Holy cat. Okay.
I could make something up, but, you know. But no, I mean, I see where you're coming from. Wait a minute. I found the person responsible for it. Holly.
Can I borrow that?
Hang on a minute.
So just a little bit. The request for the report, of course, came through the appropriations. And when it was submitted, it, of course, went through our leadership and then through the Department of Interior, and then, yes, to OMB, and then to PMB, and then to Appropriations Committee.
So the Appropriation Committee in the House of Representatives asked for it.
My understanding, both.
Both the House
Both the House and the Senate, yes.
Okay.
Have received the report.
All right. But who asked for it? The House Appropriations or the Senate?
It came out of the consolidated.
The consolidated one.
Appropriations,
Okay.
yep.
Okay.
So it would have been the conference
Okay.
report.
All right. Bruce, did you hear that?
Yes, thank you.
I mean, not Barry, not Bruce. That'll teach me to drink iced tea for lunch. Okay. All right. Anything else, Barry?
Not at the moment.
All right.
Please
Okay.
continue.
Yes. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has there been any acknowledgement that the report was received at all?
Oh, yes, I think, yes.
So
I've had a few requests for some additional information from some staffers. And I think our Ledge Affairs folks have seen some stuff as well.
Okay.
So, because it's come through them as well, and I've worked with our Ledge Affairs to get that information back to them with
So-
their leadership in that. So,
So did USDA or Interior from the Interior Secretary's office down, have they acknowledged this thing at all? I'm just curious, is because we can lobby, we can insert our comments into this process, and I think I'd like to be able to do that if we can. And so I guess rather than cold turkey go in and talk with Undersecretary Bernhardt or one of those folks, I'd like to know, who's seen the report and who's commented on it, or who's, it's surprising to me that with a report that they requested that was provided to them has gone on deaf ears. I'm just curious about it.
well, I think we feel the same way. So,
Yeah.
Alan, anything? Oh, where did Alan go? So, yeah, I mean, we really have not got much information since then.
Okay.
So, because there were several, besides the options in the report, there are some proposed legislative fixes, or
Right.
I won't say fixes, but amendments to the act. So, I mean, those were some things that were, would allow us to move forward. And I would ask the board to say, take a look at those as well in the report.
Right.
Those legislative potential legislative amendments that the BLM said, this will help us, in this situation.
Do you, board, and I'm just going to ask you all this, I'm sure this is something that ain't going to go away, and Bruce has asked us to look at the more information. I was not aware that there was some proposed changes to the 1971 law. Do you think it would behoove us to kind of table this until the next meeting so we can examine the whole picture and come up with a decision at that time, instead of going off half-cocked and not knowing the
So
full
Fred,
story?
we didn't think that we needed to include the report to Congress in the notebook, and that's our oversight. I mean, it is on the website, and I don't know if it would be beneficial to put it up on the screen here or what, but I
Well,
mean,
it
but
would-
again, you're dealing with a complex report in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and so I don't think so, but, yeah, I think if you and Dorothea could furnish us up with that, website address and all, I mean, you don't have to do it now, but
Do you want copies of it?
do you have copies of it?
I can get you copies in 10 minutes.
We would love to have copies
Okay.
of that. That way we can.
Then I
talk
will
about
excuse
it.
myself
Okay,
for that
all right,
time.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we're going to table this for the moment. Okay, all right. Okay. One of the resolutions that I'd like to bring up is the one that we've made every time because it really makes sense. Where's it at? I've lost it again. There it is. And it's the one that we have, recommendation 7, and it's one that we made all the time, and it says BLM shall continue to work towards full implement with that big word, previous accepted recommendations of the board and prioritize according to the BLM metrics of meeting AML. Note, this is the first recommendation from the board's April meeting, and in other words, just make sure that they follow up on this stuff. I don't like us to make recommendations and they say, yes, we want to do it, and then nothing else happens. Does that make sense to everybody? So I would like to include that for sure. Any comment on that? Does that, I mean, I really want to know, does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
It makes sense.
Okay.
My only comment is that what was obvious and urgent when this came up the first time has exponentially gotten worse since then.
Right, and yeah, it has, but still there's, I mean, and the thing, when the board makes a recommendation, we make it in such a way to where we want them to do something, but there's a lot of, and for lack of a better phrase, government red tape that we don't know anything about. And even though it makes sense to me, makes sense to you, when you apply it to the overall thing, there's no way they can do that because of all the government red tape. And so they have to adjust, adapt, and all that. And one of the things I noticed that when I first came on this board is that there was no follow-up on this stuff. I mean, if you go back and look from the very beginning when they had these advisory boards, there was recommendations made on and on and on and on, and no follow-up. And one thing I wanted to do as a chair is be sure that if we made the effort, we took the time to discuss and develop recommendations, I wanted to be able to follow up and say, did you or did you not? What could you do? What couldn't you do? Especially the ones that they say we agree with. Does that make, and so the one reason why we did this is so we would always have that up front. where we knew when it would come up again, when they gave their answers to it, we would have this, that we would be able to see what they were. And the broad stroke of everything that we have approached is meeting AML. Okay, and so everything that we do has a basis, basically, of meeting AML.
That's exactly right, and Mr. Chairman, and I would just also expand on that idea. I'm not sure how the other board members report these activities to the people that they answer to. But being a county commissioner, I know my county commission, and I also know the Fish and Game Commission for the state of Nevada, including the Department of Wildlife, is keenly interested in what we're doing right here. And I have updated them, and I will update them again when I get back from this meeting in terms of what transpired here. And those questions get asked. You know, of all of those proposals that you made in Grand Junction, which ones were handled, and if not, why? And so I would say that it's real important that we have that conversation each time.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, now another thing that I want to bring up, and it's one of the things that, Ben, do you have that I talked to you about, that you typed up for me? Would you read that for us, please? By the way, board, Ben is an excellent typist. If you need anything typed up, I'm sure to see him.
Sure, I appreciate that.
I type with one finger on each hand, but he uses his whole hands. Oh, thank you, my friend. Okay. Okay. One of the problems that we have is water issues, and we've talked about this. And we're going to talk about this, but here's what we have come up with. Encourage BML to gather horses and HMAs that are over AML that are reliant upon supplemental water. Once that HMA is at AML, stop hauling supplemental water except under very extreme circumstances. What we've got is that, and it's one of them things to where people say, let the horses run free, and then when they get short of water, oh, you got to carry them water. We have to understand these are wild horses. I don't see very few times do the Game and Fish Commission carry out water for the deer and the elk. In extreme situations, they do. It's the same thing with hay and things of this. And so the problem is AML, getting the horses where they are. A lot of these areas, supplemental water hurts because them horses stay around where that area is instead of going out and drinking water from this spring while they graze in this spring. If they've got a source of nice water right there, that's where they're going to stay, and they abuse that ecosystem where they're at, and it's just not good. So anyway, that's one recommendation I'd like to bring up. Anybody have any comment, Jim?
Yeah, I think we had a pretty robust conversation about that this morning, but it comes back to, from my standpoint, to the ecosystems and preservation of those ecosystems. And one of the things that I have observed in Nevada, which I mentioned this morning, I want to state for the record right now, is that we have districts, BLM districts in Nevada right now that have actually programmed water hauling as on an annual basis. And before we have a water season, before we know what the season is going to look like, and to their credit, there has been historic problems with water distribution in some of those HMAs, and so they just put it on. That's programmed, and they get their contractors and they haul water. The problem with that is that if you're dealing with excess or with problems with your HMA or your stocking rate, and you're doing it as a part of your program, you are assuring the fact that you are well above at least the carrying capacity of that piece of country during this cycle, during this weather cycle. You know, we're in a drought now, You come out of that, maybe things change, but the bottom line is that every year, if you know that's going to happen every single year, and you're programming for that, that tells me that you know that you've got an issue with stocking rates, and all you're doing is, like I said yesterday, you're drilling a hole in the floor take care of the leak in the roof. But I would say that, you know, that gathers are an important part of that, and for the horses' benefit as much as for the wildlife benefit, because a lot can happen under those circumstances when you're hauling water to one location. Things can happen, like a float sticks open and it drains a tank out onto the ground, and all those animals are standing around an empty tank. Those kinds of things those are just not tenable. That's not management. That's just trying to temporarily take care of a problem. I'm not saying we should allow these animals to go without water. I'm just saying is that from a program perspective, gathers need to occur under those circumstances.
Mr. Chairman.
Ginger.
I certainly don't disagree with what you're saying. In addition to horses, if this has been being done for year after year, then have you also habituated other species to count on these water sources as well as the horses? And might there be a weaning process? I don't know, but I would worry about that.
Well, as the group we had talk with us today are, SMEs, subject matter experts, he had a graph that showed that when there are horses there, other animals don't come to that water.
Well, that's not universally true, of course.
No.
There are birds that drink out of, the horses are not there all the time. And so there are other species that use that water. So I'm asking a informational question here, because I'm not familiar with where are you talking about?
There's several right now, but the Hawaii Desert was one that was habitually done, and they, to their credit, we just burned the center out of the Hawaii Desert. Yeah. So there's a huge gather ongoing right now because there's no winter range for those horses to sit on. Mm-hmm. The sad part of it is that we have a fairly large wildlife resource that's going to come down to that same winter range that's not missing. That's missing right now. So.
Okay. All right, we got about 20 more minutes. Okay, anybody else have anything to bring up?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Jim. Okay.
Pardon me. I think, in talking with Dr. Perriman, one of the recommendations that we really wanted to see incorporated in some form is provide a specific program of proposals that would trigger emergency gathers on those HMAs that overlap over the top of habitats which are severely impacted at this moment in time, or are have an endangered species or threatened species or species on the sensitive species list that are actually competing right now for that. Because we're actually seeing, a good example is the greater sage grouse. A good portion of those HMAs that are overstocked, which have issues with limited water distribution right now, are directly competing with greater sage grouse. Mainly in Dr. Perriman's comment, the big issue with greater sage grouse right now, according to all of the studies that are on the ground right now, the limiting factor in northern Nevada is late spring brood habitat. And that brood habitat is directly impacted by horses, because they're looking for that lush riparian habitat as well, and that's what they're on. So rather than push those populations to the brink to where we have to list them on the endangered species list, we feel that it's prudent for the part of the Bureau of Land Management to actually affect those removals down, certainly down to AML or low AML, and evaluate that following to make sure that we're at a level that will no longer impact those resources. Does that make sense on that or not?
Yeah, Ginger?
Yeah, I had a question. I don't know whether anybody was at the advisory board meeting in Oklahoma City when Dr. Jeff Manning gave a report, and he listed the top 8 reasons for the decline in sage-grouse populations. And at that time, he didn't list wild horses. And this was, I can't remember, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And after the meeting, he was asked why, he did not list horses. And he said they really are not a player in this. And I think it was based on the fact that at that time, at least, there weren't as many wild horses, but still, he was, I think he was being very honest, but it didn't meet well with BLM at that time, but I think he was just giving his honest assessment of a study that he'd done.
Not familiar with the man. Is he?
Oregon.
Oregon?
Yeah.
I can tell you with 30 plus years of experience on the ground, observing sage grouse in their natural habitats and whatnot, I can tell you there's, especially with regard to riparian and upland riparian meadow complexes, which are crucial for late season brooding, that horses very much have an impact on them. And especially in the years like we're in right now where waters are limited to certain locations. And it's not like we see in this part of the country where you can point across the valley and there's 2 springs over here. Waihe Desert, there might be 3 springs running in the entire Waihe Desert, which, by the way, is almost 5,000. If you include the Idaho side of it, we're talking about 5,000 square miles. So it's a large piece of habitat, very high, sits above 7,000 feet, and 6,500, 7,000 feet in much of it, and the available water certainly in this time of the year, or this under these conditions, are critical. And I appreciated Dr. Perryman's comments on that yesterday, because from the way he sees it right now, based on what we see in the priority habitat for greater sage grouse in northern Nevada, the potential for impacts for wild horses is very real.
The thing that I want to just point out is the stage pictures, or the time pictures at that stage that we saw this morning from 2012, 2016, and 2018, the change in and that's got to have impact on everything that uses that range. And so so what would your recommendation read?
Recommendation would be to evaluate, for the Bureau to evaluate those HMAs which overlap critical habitat, or priority or general habitat for greater sage grouse, and to determine whether or not under emergency gather situation to at least remove horses down to AML, and then to monitor from that point on to determine whether or not that has been adequate.
And that's late season or late brood type habitat?
Late spring brood habitat.
Okay.
That would be what would benefit immediately from that right now. But there would be other habitats that would be included in that general habitat as well.
Okay.
But that would be our recommendation.
Why
now.
don't you draft that up and bring it to us at our meeting, okay? Ben, you've got something.
I think that there is a sense from a lot of stakeholders in the West that the Bureau of Land Management is going to get control of the wild horse and burro program. I think that there is a false hope amongst different state wildlife agencies that this program will be resolved within the next decade. And if we can look into the past and learn from history, we can see that this program has never been on a sustainable path forward. And I think that there's that the Bureau of Land Management needs to recognize the failures of the Wild Horse and Burro policy and to not give false hope to the other stakeholders in the West. So I developed a recommendation to notify, I got stuff popping up. Notify all Western states' governor's offices, Western counties, RACs, and state wildlife agencies where wild horses exist that the Bureau of Land Management's Wild Horse and Burro program is unsustainable, underfunded, and has no plan to stop the exponential growth of wild horses and burros, which are currently 3 times over the appropriate management level. Notify these parties that thousands of horses have already left the defined herd management areas and that large breeding herds are expanding in number and range far outside of where they are legally designated. Notify these parties to expect the increased potential for ecological impacts, economic ramifications, highway safety concerns, litigation from multiple parties, heated press, and to recognize that it is beyond the Bureau of Land Management's current ability to stop either the population growth or the expansion of these wild horse herds. To encourage states and local stakeholders to fully understand that the Bureau of Land Management's Wild Horse and Burro program has no current plan to manage wild horses as dictated by law, and to encourage those parties to develop management plans for thousands of breeding horses outside of herd management areas.
That's pretty long. Celeste?
I would say it's a little overkill to continually throw BLM under the bus for everything. Just because this placing blame on who did what is here nor there. I think preparing other state agencies and groups that you mentioned for participation in what is going to take many stakeholders and counties and states and cities is a way forward. But I don't think perhaps with that particular language. But I completely appreciate the direction of it and the need to involve different levels of administration of this.
One thing I have been greatly impressed with, and I'm pleased, and I'm surprised a little bit, to be quite frank with you, is the reaching out of the advocacy groups to try to come up with a solution by working with everybody that's involved. That's something that Celeste, our new board member, that I appreciate a lot, has drove home to me that, and it's really, really neat. And it's one of those things to where I'm really feeling good. She's talking about private placement of these horses in in long-term holding and more of that. And that's really, really one of the things that I feel more encouraged about and enthused about is the joint working together. You know, if you got two horses in harness and they're both pulling different ways, you ain't gonna go nowhere. But if you put those horses where they're pulling in the same direction, you can move a lot of stuff. And I'm encouraged about this. But one of the things that I'm a little bit, and I guess I don't know, I'm an old man and I'm kind of stuck in my ways at times, but there has to be give and take in every aspect of it. And Celeste and I have had lots of talks about this, and I want to congratulate BLM for picking her, because I think she's going to be a great board member, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. But I agree with Ben's position in that some of the things that have been done don't make any sense, and it seems like it's getting worse and worse and worse. Ben has been on the board for 3 years, and he's been a very active and vocal proponent for the Bureau of Land Management. He's done an awful lot to help them. He's done a lot to help Mustang Heritage, and he's really worked hard, and I sense his frustrations. And I've had talks with Ben, and we kind of, kind of like turning a great big ship. It takes a while to turn it, but you also, just like we did in 2016, you've got to sometimes take action to make that everything is you're serious about it. And so this is something that we need to talk about a little bit further and explore. And I sense Ben's frustrations, and but the other thing I want to do is when we make recommendations, I want them to be of the kind that we can get an answer from. I don't want them to be where BLM says, well, that's too much, we can't do any of that, so we're not going to do anything. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm just thinking. Anybody else have a comment? Jim?
Mr. Chairman, thanks again. Ben, we talked a little bit about this morning, and I don't disagree with what you just cited there. I think I do disagree though with the direction that's going to take both us and the Bureau of Land Management, because I've been sitting here last couple of days, and I've been encouraged by the reaching out, as our chair has talked about, from the NGOs. I think we have, and I do believe this, I'm not being Pollyanna about it, I think we have that energy and that momentum for us to actually take a whack at trying to rectify at least a good portion of the mistakes of the past, and with, i.e. all of those horses in captivity. And I think I would not want to send a message to folks that might have an interest in becoming a partner in this thing. I would hate to send them the message that we're defeated, and that their involvement as such would be irrelevant. I want other folks to know that this is another shot at trying to do the right thing, but I also want them to understand what I believe in my down deep inside is that this is our last best hope that we're doing right now. I know it all sounds doom and gloom, and the sky's going to fall. But I can tell you right now that everybody that knows anything about range ecology right now, that has been watching what's going on the ground the last 30 years, are all saying the same thing in unison, and it's our last best hope. So I just want to say that I want to embrace what has been offered so far, and I have been heartened by the involvement of those folks that want to be a part of the solution in this thing. And I would just tell the Bureau of Land Management that there's a lot of folks that are elbow to elbow with you right now and want to see you succeed, because we succeed, and so do the horses right alongside you.
Mr. Chair, you're 5 minutes from break.
Steve, you got a comment?
I might change the verbiage a little bit and maybe shorten up what Ben's recommendation is, but I think it comes in the context of hope for the best but prepare for the worst. And I think, in today's modern age, when there's a hurricane coming in off the coast, they don't wait until it hits to make preparations for it. And I think there is an urgency now more than ever, just as Jim has talked about, that there are drastic changes that need to take place, because there is an ecological disaster that we're not facing, that we're not looking at in the future, that is transpiring as we speak, and is just going to get worse and worse if some drastic and hard decisions aren't made. And this big ship, as big as it may be and as big as it is growing, doesn't get it turned around real fast. And so I think it would be advantageous to, I guess, have a call to arms even for all of the other agencies involved to get in, participate, and help out in any way, shape, or form, because we are facing an ecological disaster real quick if things don't change. And we need every player that can be at the table here at this time.
Yeah, go.
Just a couple of comments. I'm relatively new to the board, but I've been following this issue for about 15 or 20 years. And I've talked to a lot of BLM people, and I've talked to a lot of people from various areas, and I have no doubt that the BLM people are 100% committed to this, and the issue is well above them. It's not them. But I think an interesting thing that I've observed over the last 2 years, 3 years, I spent a lot of time around the horse industry, and up until about 2 years ago, the horse industry paid no attention to this issue because they felt it was not their issue. Veterinary medicine paid some attention because of our concern about animal welfare, but we were not deeply in the fight. And what I've noticed over the last 2 to 3 years is there's strong interest throughout the horse industry. There's strong interest throughout the veterinarians around the country that I talk to, that we've reached a point here that something needs to be done. And so they're willing to step up and aid in doing something, and I think that's reflected this morning when the folks from various animal welfare groups have come forward with some suggestions. I'd like to know a lot more detail about it, but it encourages me that this is no longer a wild horse and burro issue. It's an issue for everybody that has any interest in it, whether they be wildlife biologists or hunters or veterinarians or horse owners. And so I think that's encouraging because every meeting that I go to, absolutely every meeting I go to, there's discussion about the plight of the wild horses and burros and what should be done. And so I think that's encouraging to me because it's a significant shift in how folks have viewed this in the past. And these are some folks that can do something about it. They're not, they're not just wondering about it. They can adopt the horses and they can buy the horses and so forth. Oh, okay. Well, I'm about done anyhow. But anyhow, I think it's encouraging. I think there's a lot of activity out there that maybe even BLM and some of the folks involved close to this are not aware of.
Well, one thing I'm going to do in my role as board, I'm going to establish 2 new working groups, and one to work with that group that you have. I'm really going to appoint you as chairman of that. And the other thing I'm going to do is with my vice chair, Sue, and with you, and I'm going to appoint a couple of others to work with these advocacy groups and come up with these answers and pull us together, because I am really excited about that. Really excited. So as we go to break, I have some very good news, something that I'm excited about. At this point, or at one time during the day, we had Belgium, Switzerland, Denmark, France, and Australia watching us on TV. And so that's pretty cool because next week I'm going to Australia, so maybe they're trying to figure out what I look like anyway. And then how to receive me, yeah. And we've had almost 400 people watching this thing the whole time, and we've had total minutes watched of almost 26,000. So y'all didn't know it, but y'all are movie stars now. Well, Ben always has been, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, we're going to take a break. We'll come back at 2 o'clock, and one of the most exciting parts of this is letting the public get to speak, and that'll happen beginning at 2 o'clock. So we'll break till then. Thank you.